I've been holding off on reviewing Metroid Vanguard for a long while now, at least a year, due to two preconceived notions I assumed of it. That one, it would be an extremely impressive mod that accurately translates the Metroid Prime gameplay to SRB2, a full circle moment for a game that descended from the original Doom, and two, it would probably be abysmal to play on controller, and with my complete and utter ineptitude at playing any genre of game on mouse and keyboard, I would be unable to give the mod anywhere near an objective ranking. Luckily, it actually works really well for the most part, barring just one, admittedly major, problem that will come to haunt it. But without further ado, let's dive in. Metroid Vanguard seeks to translate the famous Metroid Prime style of first-person action shooters into the world of SRB2, a daunting task, as while SRB2 is descended from perhaps the original and most famous first-person action shooter ever made, Doom, it has been so thoroughly modified in every aspect that I would have assumed the level of design and physics would no longer be reconcilable with the genre. Unsurprisingly, based off how gushing many of the SRB2 forum reviews are for Vanguard, it achieves this goal. While it is not really a Metroidvania, as it would likely be impossible for any SRB2 mod to ever create the intricate, highly interconnected single level necessary based purely off maximum map sizes, it still provides players with the experience of slowly leveling Samus up from a dirty scrub to a true intergalactic bounty hunter form. Usually, this would be the point I rattle off a list of Samus Aran's abilities and say what I did and didn't like about each one, but that would be hugely impractical and entirely redundant here, as there are dozens of abilities found throughout the mod. Even off the top of my head, there are at least 5 different primary weapons, each with an additional mode, 4 types of explosives, and a whole armory's worth of gauntlets, boots, and more esoteric attack modules. In other words, the mod adds a lot of content. Each item is dropped off specific monitors instead of the more typical Metroidvania style of hiding them behind bosses or other challenges, which does make each upgrade feel less deliberate, but also molds Vanguard into its very own little niche. No two runs are ever necessarily going to feel the same, as I doubt many SRB2 players will end up taking the exact same route and destroy the exact same monitors to drop the exact same items in multiple playthroughs. So, the item collection is very different from Metroid Prime, and you're not even necessarily going to even end up with every item collected at the end of a playthrough. I certainly didn't. So how does the other half of the Prime experience, the combat, compare? As a potential disclaimer, I've never actually played a Metroid game beyond the first hour or so of Super Metroid, so my comparison is based solely off the small snippets of Metroid Prime Remastered footage that was circulating a few months back after its release. But it certainly seems to have nailed the formula. Prime was famous for its lock-on gameplay, where Samus could forego manually aiming shots at targets and instead concentrate on strafing to avoid attacks, as doing both was impossible on Nintendo's controllers. This has been replicated in Vanguard, although it generally isn't as difficult as Prime due to how comparatively passive every enemy is in SRB2, with a player locking onto targets with Custom 1, before attacking with their primary weapon on Custom 2, or missiles on fire. To somewhat liven this up, as enemies are unsurprisingly easy to deal with using these tools, and to stop any challenge being relegated solely to bosses, most enemies have a weakness and resistance to a specific primary weapon, with some even being able to reflect shots back towards Samus, stopping combat from becoming completely mindless. Finally, for combat, the standard health system of picking up rings to tank any amount of damage has been replaced with a more traditional health bar, where each attack deals a set amount of damage. Picking up rings will heal you, 1 ring is 1 health point, and you can collect energy tanks from life monitors to increase your maximum HP. This system doesn't change the game as much as it seems like it would, as Samus is capable enough that enemies are usually unable to reach her, and can traverse levels easily enough to avoid many level hazards. It comes into play mostly during boss battles, as these are obviously where attacks and hazards become most potent, especially in the 2 new bosses Vanguard adds. Samus is also surprisingly capable of traversing SRB2's many massive platforming heavy levels, even when I spend the entirety of my time playing in first person. Generally, you can assume that platforming in a first-person viewpoint will be miserable, as it becomes hard to gauge jump distances or see where you're falling. Problematic when the two things you are constantly doing in a platformer is jumping and then falling. This is not the case here, as Samus has enough aerial control that they can pretty reliably correct faulty jumps, especially when you begin to collect items. You start off with a single standard jump and the ability to transform into the Morph Ball, but you can quickly begin to stack abilities that end up turning Samus into one of the most maneuverable characters in SRB2, period. You can increase your jump height, you can add a double jump, you can bomb jump, you can climb walls, you can grapple ledges you barely miss, you can wall jump. You can even enhance your speed to levels which makes me believe Samus could have serious potential for speedrunning, as you unlock what essentially amounts to a dash mode and spin dash, which all combines together into a character that can just about do it all: traversal, combat and speedruns. Metroid Vanguard doesn't just add a new character and gameplay style, that would be far too little work. It also adds 2 new levels to the game, both of which include a new boss fight based off those from the Metroid Prime series. First is Deep Sea Act 4, which takes the form of an underground jungle cavern, which even contains a few Metroids. After a couple of minutes of platforming and combat encounters, you end up fighting the Omega Metroid, which is an immediate step up in wow factor and general quality than the vanilla bosses. It demands attention, easily towering over Samus and with several room covering attacks to avoid. It's tanky to an unnecessary degree, and can be a little annoying to hit with a weak point that the lock-on won't necessarily be aiming for, but I'd easily take that over the comparatively boring Eggmobile forms and occasional rival fights of base SRB2. Speaking of rival fights, the second new boss is Dark Samus, which is still more interesting than the vanilla bosses, but has a particularly frustrating attack pattern that seems impossible to deal with for long enough to actually defeat the boss. It doesn't help that the tips given for the fight flash up far too quickly to read, and the major problem that plagued my time with Vanguard meant I never actually got to the boss without taking damage first, but I was eventually able to finish the fight after somehow entering some sort of final stand super form that tore Dark Samus to ribbons in seconds. So, a mixed bag. But the work of adding 2 new, completely unique bosses to the game can only add points in Vanguard's favour. Metroid Vanguard even goes so far as to add new story elements to SRB2, in the form of in-level dialogue between Samus and her SIP AI. It is unfortunately difficult to focus on, being that it occurs in the middle of levels that you're probably focusing on instead of the text boxes that flash up, but it also plays in tandem with some of the environmental storytelling SRP2 really needs more of. Essentially, Samus crash lands her SIP in Greenflower Mountain and has to wait for repairs before she can leave the planet. In the meantime, she finds signals of illegal Metroid smuggling, which is the primary motivator for moving between zones. Eventually, you find out the smuggler is either Dark Samus or Fang before Dark Samus kills him, it's never explicitly confirmed who, before your ship is repaired to fly to Egg Rock and defeat Eggman, capping off the game. So still not a story to write home about, with deep character development and thrilling plot twists, but it at least tries to create some connective tissue between zones, occasionally literally, as the new levels both end with a transition area between the current and next zone. SRB2 V2.3 really needs to add some of this, as currently the closest thing to a link between levels is the fact that Techno Hill is clearly just a more polluted part of Greenflower Mountain, and the rocket ride between Red Volcano and Egg Rock. I really don't need to go too deep into commending the graphical work that's gone into this mod. You can see clear as day the polish that has gone into the UI, especially the visor overlay around the edges of the screen. I can't overstate just how much more dynamic SRB2 feels whilst playing from this perspective, especially when Vanguard adds extra side-to-side camera sway to better imply the sense of speed and power behind Samus's movements. The particles of your different projectiles all look great and help to distinguish which are being used in the heat of battle, where you may have otherwise forgotten which beam you have currently selected, especially when they're used on bosses which have their own custom sprites in their own custom arenas, using their own custom attacks which are all just as high quality as your own. Vanguard can even be played with Metroid music enabled, which changes zone and boss themes to appropriate Metroid equivalents, which further adds to the atmosphere and authenticity of the overhaul. I've sang the praises of this mod. I really haven't mentioned any serious problems with the mod. You might assume that I think it's one of the best SRB2 mods I've yet played, and you would be absolutely correct. It is. But I can unfortunately still not give it a coveted 10 out of 10, as it has one major problem that can range from mildly amusing, to somewhat frustrating, to downright infuriating. You'll see in my footage that I seem to be constantly firing my weapons, even wasting rockets on targets that don't exist. This is not because I'm going crazy, dear viewer, but rather because I was plagued with some sort of glitch where no matter what I did, the game seemed to assume I was holding down the fire button at all times, meaning it would fire everything I had, all the time. This seemed amusing at first, but quickly became annoying when it wouldn't stop no matter which settings I changed, then became increasingly frustrating when it would often cause me to enter the Dark Samus fight with less than a third of my total health, as the morph bombs it would constantly drop would trigger the explosive barrels nearby or bomb jump me into a pit of thorns. I assume the problem is exclusive to controller, and hey, it's probably a problem exclusive to me. God knows it wouldn't be the first time, but this review is my subjective experience with my time spent on it, and my subjective experience was so heavily altered by this, I have no choice but to dock a point and give Metroid Vanguard a 9 out of 10. Respectable, but not as high as it could have achieved. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed the video, and ciao.